Welcome to Swai Files. I am Swai. Can you imagine, in just a brief moment, the person standing in front of you, laughing and talking happily, suddenly vanishes as if they never existed? That feeling chills your blood. But what's even more terrifying is that these events are actually happening. Mysterious disappearances, so eerie they shake the world, leaving behind unanswered questions. No one knows the cause. No one understands the truth behind those shadows of the past. And among the many disappearances, the story of Jonas Müller remains one of the most frightening and unpredictable mysteries, forever haunting the minds of those brave enough to confront this truth.
Hello.
Jonas, hey, it's Swai. How are you today?
Oh, hey, Swai. I'm fine. Thanks.
Good. So, are you ready?
Ready for what?
To tell that story. The story that still sends chills down everyone's spine. I know you can't avoid it forever, right?
Yeah, I know. But not everyone will believe me, Swai. What I'm about to say, you need to be prepared.
I've been ready for a long time, Jonas. Your story is the greatest mystery never solved. Don't let it be buried forever.
I never thought that mountain trip would haunt me for the rest of my life. September 2019, when autumn painted the Alps, I and 3 friends, Peter, Anna, and David, decided to conquer the summit of Grossglockner. We prepared meticulously, making sure every detail was perfect. But from the moment the journey began, something was off. We all felt an invisible tension, but no one dared to speak about it. On the first day, we camped at 2,500 meters. As night fell, I could hear the wind howling through the rocks, but there was something in that sound that unsettled me. That night, Anna couldn't sleep and said she felt someone was watching. I tried to reassure her that it was just her imagination, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease myself. On the second day, as we climbed higher, Peter discovered strange footprints on the rocky path. They were clear, but oddly, there were no signs of where they led. The tracks disappeared abruptly, as if the one who made them had vanished into thin air. It unnerved me, but David was intrigued and wanted to investigate. We followed the footprints, but they only led us to a narrow ravine where there was nothing but a deadly silence. That night, we camped at 3,500 meters, but things only got worse. My satellite phone lost signal, which shouldn't have been possible at that altitude. I began to feel something was wrong, not with the weather or the terrain, but as if some unseen force was enveloping us. On the morning of September 28th, when we woke up, Peter had disappeared without a trace. His tent was empty, there were no footprints leading outside, and no signs of a struggle. We searched everywhere, calling out Peter's name, but all we were met with was terrifying silence. The whole day passed in panic, and as night fell, a snowstorm began to hit. The next morning, Anna also vanished. This time, her backpack was left right in front of the tent, and her camera was still in the bag. There were no footprints, no indication of where she had gone. Strangely, Anna's watch, which had been working perfectly, was found stopped at 3 a.m., the same time David said he had heard whispers in the wind. David began to panic. He told me that not only had he heard whispers, but he had also seen shadows moving in the snow. I didn't believe it until I too felt that something was watching us. But every time I turned around, all I saw was the blinding snowstorm and the terrifying silence. We decided not to continue climbing, but as we tried to find our way down the mountain, the fierce snowstorm hindered all our efforts. That night, while trying to take shelter, David started saying that he had to go, because someone was calling his name. I tried to stop him, but David stepped out of the tent and vanished into the storm. The puzzling part was, just a few minutes later, when I went out to look for him, the snow seemed to have left no trace of David's footsteps. There was nothing. It was as if he had evaporated into thin air. I had no choice but to try to survive. But as I attempted to make my way down the mountain, I felt like I was being led down a path I couldn't control. Something, though I didn't know what, was directing my every step. As the storm began to fade, I found myself lost in a barren land with the ruins of a village abandoned centuries ago, a village I had never heard anyone mention. On the map, there was no sign of any village in this area. In the eerie silence, I saw vague shadows moving among the ruined houses. I wasn't sure what I was seeing, whether it was just an illusion caused by exhaustion or remnants of a distant past. Among the shadows, I recognized the familiar figure of David. He stood among the ruins, staring at me with hollow eyes. I didn't dare approach him, but when those shadows started moving towards me, I realized I had little choice. I tried to run, but it felt as if my legs were being held back, each step becoming heavier. The shadows came closer, the whispers grew clearer. It was no longer the wind, but mysterious voices, filled with chilling dread. From that moment on, I don't know what happened. All I remember is the blurry white of the snow, the shadows, and the overwhelming feeling of being trapped. When I woke up, I found myself deep in a forest far from the mountain, with no signs of the abandoned village I had seen. And what I can't forget is that in my hand, though I don't remember when I grabbed it, was Anna's watch, still stopped at 3 a.m. To this day, I can't explain what happened to my friends or how I managed to survive. But one thing is certain. What we encountered wasn't just nature. There's a mysterious force beyond our imagination that exists there. And if I were to tell anyone, I doubt they would believe me. After waking up in the forest, I knew I was no longer anywhere near Grossglockner. The snow had melted, but there was no sign of my friends, the ruined village, or even the snowstorm I clearly remembered before blacking out. It all felt like a dream. Yet Anna's watch was still on my wrist, proof of what had happened. I tried to find my way out of the forest, but each step only made everything feel more bizarre. The dense forest wasn't the same as the one we had climbed through. It didn't seem to belong to any terrain I'd ever known. There were no sounds of birds or animals, just deadly silence. Beneath my feet, the damp earth was covered in moss, and the trees were twisted in strange ways, as if they didn't belong to this world. What sent chills down my spine the most were the footprints I saw. They weren't mine, but someone else's, or something else's, that had walked through here before me. They led deep into the forest, disappearing every few meters, then reappearing somewhere else. But what truly frightened me was that they weren't ordinary footprints. Each step left a deep impression on the ground, as if the person or thing that had passed through here carried a massive weight. The deeper I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. At times, I turned around and caught glimpses of shadows moving between the towering trees. But when I stopped to look closely, they vanished instantly. The air around me became stifling, and I began to struggle for breath, as if there wasn't enough oxygen. For the first time in my life, I truly felt the grip of panic closing in on me. After hours of wandering through the forest, I started to hear noises, not the wind or rustling trees, but distant whispers. At first, they were faint and indistinct, but gradually they became clearer. The voice didn't belong to anyone from our group, yet it called my name.
Jonas, don't go any further. Turn back.
The voice wasn't just coming from one direction, but from all around me, as if I was surrounded by invisible shadows. I started running. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I needed to get away from this place as fast as possible. But it seemed like every path led me back to where I started. In the middle of the forest, I realized I had been running in a perfect circle. The trees felt like a labyrinth with no exit, and fear began to invade every thought I had. Suddenly, I saw a light ahead. A small wooden cabin, old and covered in moss, stood hidden among the trees. A faint light flickered through the window like a dying oil lamp. With no other choice, I decided to approach it, hoping to find someone who could help. When I stepped inside, everything felt bizarre. The furniture was covered in a thick layer of dust, as if the cabin had been abandoned for years. But the lamp was still burning, and on the table lay an open notebook with yellowed pages. Inside, scrawled handwriting, as if written in panic, recorded cryptic lines. They come from another place, not human. We were never supposed to be here. When you hear the calling, don't answer. Before I could read further, a soft knock echoed at the door. At that moment, my heart nearly stopped. How could anyone be here? I slowly walked to the door, hoping it was someone who could help. But when I opened it, no one was there. Instead, on the ground, I saw something I recognized instantly: Peter's watch. The watch had stopped, precisely at 3 a.m., just like Anna's. I stepped back, my heart racing wildly. How was this possible? Peter had disappeared, and I was alone here. But clearly something or someone had found him. Fear overtook me, and I bolted from the cabin. The whispers returned, this time louder and clearer, as if they were right beside me. Jonas, don't try to escape. Your time is running out. Everything started to blur. I no longer knew where I was running, only that I had to get away from those terrifying voices. But no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape. Every time I thought I was leaving the forest, I would find myself right back where I had started. Finally, I collapsed to the ground, exhausted and desperate. The shadows continued to move around me as if playing a game of chase with their prey. And then, in a moment of haunting silence, I heard soft footsteps approaching from behind me. When I turned around, everything seemed to freeze. Standing just a few steps away from me was Peter. But he was no longer the friend I once knew. His face was pale, his eyes hollow and lifeless like a doll's. He said nothing, just stared at me, his lips starting to move, forming words without sound. In that moment, I realized that Peter, or whatever had taken Peter's form, no longer belonged to our world. Why didn't you listen to them? Peter's voice echoed, but it didn't sound like it came from his mouth. It reverberated from all around, as if the forest itself was whispering. We heard them, and now there's no way out. I wanted to run, but my body was frozen in place. The shadows continued to swirl around us, growing thicker, closer. The space around me felt distorted, strange noises blending with my ragged breaths. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. Peter stepped closer, his empty eyes locked on mine, and I could feel the cold emanating from his body. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't respond, and I found myself pinned against a tree. Everything seemed to stretch into an endless moment. We tried to warn you. Peter's voice rang out again, clearer this time. But now it's too late. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The whispers around me grew louder, more intense, and then another figure emerged from the mist. It was Anna, with the same expression as Peter, empty and lifeless. She moved closer, and with each step, the air around me grew heavier. Among the shadows, I saw David. He stood farther away, but his face was just as I remembered. Terrified, full of anguish, as if he were trapped in a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. He didn't say anything, just stood there, staring at me with pleading eyes as if begging for help. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. The entire scene was enveloped in an eerie silence, the shadows closing in on me more and more. The whispers no longer came from afar. They were right next to me. Jonas, it's your turn now. Everything suddenly went dark. I no longer knew where I was or even who I was. It felt like I was being pulled into an endless void where time didn't exist and there was no escape. The whispers vanished, replaced by absolute silence. When I opened my eyes, the faint morning light filtered through the dense canopy. I was lying on the ground, no longer in the desolate forest, but by the edge of a small stream. My watch was still strapped to my wrist, but its hands had stopped moving. There was no sign of Peter, Anna, or David. I stood up, my limbs aching, and tried to find my way out of the forest. Everything had returned to an eerie normality, as if everything I had just experienced was nothing more than a dream. But I knew it wasn't. I left that mountain and never returned. My friends were never found. The police concluded they had perished in the snowstorm, but I knew the truth. They hadn't just disappeared. They had been pulled into another world, a world humans were never meant to enter. And since that day, I've lived with the haunting fear that one day, those whispers will return, seeking me out. Because I know one thing, some things never truly disappear. They're just waiting for their moment.
Thank you, Jonas. I know sharing this story wasn't easy.
No, thank you for listening. Very few people actually believe what I've been through.
Your story will make many people think. You've done the best you could.
I can only hope. But remember, there are places we shouldn't go, and mysteries we shouldn't unravel.
I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Goodbye, Swai. Be careful of what you hear in the wind.